The creative director at Vice then grabbed her crotch without her consent. The claim was ignored. She was fired after she refused a sexual relationship with the president of Vice. Vice actually have a guide on how to drug women into having sex at a party. All transsexuals are slutty, so don't worry about that either. How can a company that has such strong words about controversial figures hold such a troubled and horrible past? Vice is a very large internet news source valued at $1.5 billion. They consider themselves liberal, yet many of the actions that go on behind the scenes are anything but that. From women being sexually harassed to disturbing views on sexuality and morality, this is my video on the dangerous rise of Vice. Firstly, one of the most striking red flags about Vice is the incredibly high number of sexual assault allegations from inside the company itself. These issues have been going on consistently for over 20 years, and there have been allegations from between lower level employees right up to involving the founders and the higher ups of the company. I shall go through some of the ones I found quickly in no particular order. Abby Ellis, who used to work for Vice as a journalist, claims that in 2013 the former head of the company, Mr. Mojica, made multiple unwanted advances towards her, including deliberately trying to kiss her against her will. She ended up having to yell at him and hit him. Abby apparently reported the incident to human resources at Vice, and no one helped her. She also felt that due to the incident she missed out on future opportunities at Vice. 2 years later, the same guy was reported for groping another employee at a party. The same year, the former Vice worker Kate Goss reported to human resources that after work, the creative director at Vice put his hand on her crotch without her consent. This claim was also ignored. A year later in 2016, Vice's president, Mr. Creighton, ended up paying a settlement of $135,000 to a former employee who claimed that she was fired after she rejected a sexual relationship with him. Also in 2016, Vice paid $24,000 to one of their journalists called Joanna Knight. She claimed that she had been a victim of sexual harassment, racism, and sexism in the workplace. She also mentioned that one of her co-workers was asked questions about whether she had slept with black men specifically for some reason. I'm not going to go through all of them, but over 24 women that worked for Vice came out in 2017 saying that they had experienced or witnessed sexual harassment in the workplace. There is one final case that I will mention that I think sums up Vice and its reporting quite well. In 2003, back when Vice was a magazine, Jessica Hopper, a freelance writer, did an interview with the rapper Murs. During the interview, he asked her if he could have sex with her, and she did not consent to this. The interview continued as normal, and Jessica sent off the interview in text format to Vice for them to use in the magazine. Vice actually changed her words and put in the magazine that she said yes and ended up having sex with the rapper. This would have completely ruined her credibility as a journalist, and also would have been horribly humiliating for her to have this false information shown to millions of people. What kind of a person would do that to someone? Ruin their career and make them look like a whore in front of the whole world just for a magazine article? The people who work for Vice, apparently. Judging by the other more recent cases I've just mentioned, things clearly haven't changed much. I'd recommend you keep watching, as this is not the half of it, trust me. The second reason Vice seems highly suspect is the company policies, which insinuate a rather unsafe work environment, to put it mildly. A prime example of this is the disgusting and unprofessional parties that Vice often throws. Vice actually have a guide on this, which includes how to drug women into having sex at a party, and how I'm directly quoting from this, by the way. There must be a tranny at the party. Pre-op is good, but post-breast implants, pre-gender reassignment is perfection. All transsexuals are slutty, so don't worry about that. This guest is a very high priority and should be catered to accordingly. Put her first in the queue for cocaine and drinks, tell her how pretty she is, and touch her a lot. It is also required to allow the person closest to the tranny to have first access to her tits. The Vice article next mentions that once you get a reliable drunk slut in your life, someone who will shed her clothes and let a room full of people write on her in indelible markers at the drop of a hat. Just as the night begins, give her and only her a handful of shrooms. Additionally, the article says that some things need to be brought out and offered in turn to all of your guests: heroin, Xanax, speed, meth, tranny tits, and more importantly, cocaine. The drunk slut by now should be so high on mushrooms that her enthusiasm will lead half the party into a dog pile in your roommate's bed, aka the orgy room. This is just some of the stuff that Vice has suggested in the past. If you'd like to read the full article, it's in the description. The second issue I have with the company's policies was their non-traditional workplace agreement, which staff used to have to sign. I will read some excerpts from it now. Individuals employed by Vice must be conscious of Vice's non-traditional environment and comfortable with exposure to and participation in situations that may present themselves during the course of their employment. While working at Vice, I acknowledge that I may be exposed to highly provocative material, some of it containing extremely explicit sexual and controversial content, and most disturbingly, this is at the end of the document, I agree to hold Vice harmless from any and all claims that I may have based upon Vice's workplace environment. This, coupled with the company's abysmal track record of sexual harassment cases, indicates that the agreement form was an attempt to silence the victim so that the predatory workplace atmosphere could continue. Many of the former female employees support this view, saying that they took the agreement to mean that they could not complain about issues of harassment. This in itself pretty much shows that the company has actively fostered an unsafe work environment in the past. issues. The third issue of Vice is the staff themselves and their disingenuous methods of creating these scandalous documentaries. I'm sure most of you watching this would have heard about the whole Matt Shea versus Andrew Tate situation.
I meet and get punched in the face by the inner circle of the war room.
Sorry, that almost felt like I got knocked out.
Jokes aside, unfortunately this was just one of the many cases of bad journalism that Vice does. Just this year, a small newspaper uncovered the story of a primary school teacher who made online pornography on the side and would have the 10-year-old students call her by her pornography name. She has also been married to a convicted child sexual predator. Obviously, she was fired from her job. Vice caught sight of the story, and I want you to guess whose side they picked to defend. The newspaper received an email from Vice who decided these were the important questions to ask about this case. 1. How do you respond to allegations that you outed the woman in question? 2. Why did you write articles about her? 3. She alleges that you accessed her nude photos behind her OnlyFans paywall. Is that accurate? 4. How do you respond to the allegations that you posted the photos online without her consent? She said that you harassed her. How do you respond to that? 6. How do you respond to allegations that you've also targeted other people in the community, including people you identify as LGBTQ? 7. Anything you'd like to add? Vice then made their own article on the situation, leaving out the fact that she would have her nickname in class be the same as her porn star name. There was no consideration of the other side of the argument whatsoever. Another example of the Vice staff being unprofessional is the former head of resources at Vice. She handled all of the complaints of sexual harassment and has been reported as dismissing pretty much all of the complaints. I'm not insinuating any connection from her to any of this, but it's worth noting that she also worked as Vice President of Human Resources at Harvey Weinstein's Miramax Films from 1991 to 2000. Lastly, some other things that are red flags with Vice is firstly its shareholders. Disney owns 26% of the company, and we all know that they have a political agenda. TPG Capital owns 44% of the company, which is a big deal when you find out who's behind that. To name a few employees in TPG, there's Mark Fields, a former president and CEO of Ford Motors, Kevin Rollins, former president and CEO of Dell Computers, and John Winkelried, former co-president of Goldman Sachs Group. There's a lot of talk around the global elite and their agendas. I'm no expert, so I will not comment on it, but it's worth noting for sure. Secondly, Vice seems to have a habit of writing articles on paedophiles in a disturbingly supportive way. These articles here are some of the ones that I found. I will now go on to my conclusion where I will give my own personal opinion on Vice. Overall, I believe that Vice is a disgusting, unprofessional company for an environment which has bred irresponsibility. I've come to this conclusion due to the high number of sexual harassment reports that have come from the female staff at the company, the dodgy company policies concerning the workplace, and in my opinion, the creation of deliberately biased and disingenuous documentation, and lastly, the article from which, in my point of view, promotes the manipulation of women into sex.